It was supposed to be a normal weekend, just me and my dad at home while Mom was away. But that evening, something shifted. The way he looked at me, the things he said, it didn't feel like the dad I knew. When he knocked on my door that night, my heart raced. What happened next would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. Growing up, my family always felt like a sanctuary. My mom was the energetic, loving glue that held us together, while Dad was the steady, quiet protector. Our home was filled with laughter, warm dinners, and the kind of routine that made life feel safe. I always thought of my parents as the perfect team, deeply in love and devoted to each other. Dad, a structural engineer, was practical and dependable. He wasn't the type to show his emotions openly, but his actions spoke volumes. He'd fix things around the house without being asked, or surprise Mom with her favorite flowers after a tough day. I admired his calm demeanor and quiet strength. Mom, on the other hand, was the heart of the family. She had a way of making even the mundane moments special. She worked as a nurse, often taking long shifts, but she never let her hectic schedule dampen her spirit. Her laughter was infectious, and her presence made the house feel alive. As their only child, I had always been close to both of them. My relationship with Dad, while loving, wasn't particularly deep. We got along well, but our conversations were usually surface level. Small talk about school, sports, or what we'd watch on TV that night. It was Mom who I turned to for heart-to-hearts and advice. When Mom mentioned she'd be spending a few days visiting her sister, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't the first time she'd left Dad and me to fend for ourselves for a weekend. Usually, we'd order takeout, watch movies, and fall into an easy, comfortable rhythm. But this time, the house felt different. Quieter. Heavier. That first evening, Dad and I sat on the couch, trying to fill the silence with TV and small talk. But something was off. He seemed distant, distracted, and yet his presence felt heavier than usual. As the night wore on, our conversation took an unexpected turn, deeper, more personal than anything we'd shared before. I told myself it was just the stillness of the house playing tricks on me. But as the hours ticked by, the sense of unease only grew stronger. The silence in the house the next day was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of a cup clinking or the hum of the refrigerator. I tried to shake off the odd vibe from the night before, but it clung to me like a shadow. Dad had always been calm and composed, but his energy now felt different, intense, almost too focused. I chalked it up to my imagination, but the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. As the day progressed, I noticed little things that didn't sit right. Dad seemed to find reasons to linger near me. If I was in the living room, he'd sit on the couch and start a conversation about something random, his tone too casual to feel natural. When I went to the kitchen to make a sandwich, he followed, offering to help with something as simple as slicing bread. It felt unnecessary, almost deliberate. "You're really quiet today," he commented, leaning against the counter while I buttered my toast. I forced a smile. "Just tired," I replied, hoping he wouldn't press further, but he did. "You know, we don't talk enough," he said, his voice soft. "I feel like I don't really know what's going on in your life anymore." The statement caught me off guard. Dad had never been one to express himself so openly, and it made me uncomfortable. "There's not much to tell," I mumbled, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't respond immediately, just watched me with a look I couldn't decipher. It felt too intense, like he was searching for something in my expression that I wasn't offering. I excused myself quickly, retreating to my room to escape the tension. As the day wore on, the unease grew. Later that evening, while I sat in my room scrolling on my phone, there was a soft knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. "Yeah?" I called out, my voice louder than intended. The The door creaked open, and Dad stepped in, holding a glass of water. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, setting it on my nightstand. "Thanks," I muttered, pulling the blanket higher as if it could shield me from the odd tension in the room. He lingered by the door, his gaze lingering on me longer than necessary. "If there's anything on your mind, you can tell me," he said gently. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He nodded but didn't move right away. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Finally, he turned and left, leaving the door slightly ajar. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Was I imagining things, or was there something unspoken hanging in the air between us? The next morning, I tried to act normal, hoping to shake the awkwardness. But when Dad suggested we spend the day together, just the two of us, I hesitated. The thought of being alone with him, away from the house, made me uneasy. Yet, I didn't want to make things more awkward by refusing. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "What do you have in mind?" He suggested a drive to the lake, a place we used to visit often when I was younger. It sounded innocent enough, but as we drove through the quiet streets, the silence in the car felt oppressive. Every attempt at conversation felt stilted, unnatural. When we arrived, the sight of the shimmering water brought back memories of simpler times, but it didn't ease the tension. We sat on the rocks by the shore, the silence stretching between us. Dad's shoulder brushed against mine, and I shifted slightly to create space. "I miss this," he said softly, staring at the water. "Spending time with you." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, it's nice," I murmured, though I didn't feel calm. His gaze shifted to me, his eyes filled with an intensity that made my heart race. "I don't want us to drift apart," he said. "You mean so much to me." The words felt too heavy, too intimate, and I struggled to find a response. "We're fine," I said quickly, trying to diffuse the moment. "Life's just busy, that's all." But the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe me. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I could feel us teetering on the edge of something I didn't want to confront. The drive back from the lake was quiet, but the silence wasn't the kind that comforted. It felt heavy, charged, like an invisible thread was tightening around us. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, trying to suppress the unease bubbling within me. Dad's presence beside me was palpable, his occasional glances only adding to my discomfort. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I practically bolted from the car, mumbling something about needing to get ready for bed. I needed space, distance, anything to breathe again. But the tension wasn't something I could escape so easily. It followed me, lingering like a shadow. That evening, I sat on my bed, scrolling through my phone in an attempt to distract myself. But my thoughts kept circling back to the day's events. The words Dad had said at the lake replayed in my mind, his tone too intimate, too weighted. The way his hand had lingered on mine felt like it had crossed a line I wasn't ready to acknowledge. A soft knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. My stomach tightened as his voice followed. "You still awake?" "Yeah," I replied hesitantly, my voice barely above a whisper. The door opened and he stepped inside, holding a mug of tea. "I thought this might help you relax," he said, his voice calm but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Thanks," I muttered, taking the mug but not drinking from it. I set it on the nightstand, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled the blanket tighter around me. He didn't leave. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip slightly. My pulse quickened, the air in the room feeling suffocatingly still. "You seemed a little off today," he said gently. "I just want to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," I said quickly, avoiding his gaze. "Just tired." He placed a hand on my shoulder, the touch light but lingering. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? His voice was soft, almost tender. I know, I replied, my voice shaky. The tension between us felt unbearable, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. His hand lingered a moment longer before he pulled back, leaning slightly closer. I've always been proud of you, he said softly. You're an amazing person. I nodded, unsure how to respond. The way he was looking at me, his gaze intense, almost searching, made me feel exposed, vulnerable in a way I didn't understand. Thanks, I whispered, hoping it would end the conversation. But he didn't move. Instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. The gesture, though seemingly innocent, felt far too intimate. My breath caught, and I found myself frozen, unsure of how to react. You're so special, he said, his voice barely audible. His hand lingered near my face for a moment before he pulled it back, his expression unreadable. You're so special, he said, his voice barely audible. His hand lingered near my face for a moment before he pulled it back, his expression unreadable. The air in the room felt stifling, and I forced myself to speak. I think I should get some sleep, I said, my voice firmer than before. It's been a long day. He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine one last time before he nodded. Of course, he said quietly. Good night. As he stood and left the room, closing the door behind him, I exhaled shakily, the weight of the moment crashing down on me. I sat there for what felt like hours, my thoughts racing. What was happening? Was I imagining things, or had something shifted between us? The questions swirled in my mind, leaving me unable to find any peace. The following days were a strange dance of avoidance and tension. I found reasons to stay out of the house, running errands or spending time with friends. When I was home, I kept to my room, avoiding prolonged interactions with Dad. But even in the quiet moments, the memory of that night lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, there was another knock at the door. My stomach tightened, and my heart raced. I didn't want to answer, but something compelled me to. Come in, I said reluctantly. He entered, his expression softer than usual. I just wanted to say goodnight, he said, lingering near the door. Good night, I replied, hoping he'd leave quickly. But instead of leaving, he stepped closer, his gaze steady. I hope you know how much you mean to me, he said softly. I don't say it enough. Thanks, I murmured, my voice barely audible. He reached out, placing a hand on my arm. The touch sent a shiver through me, and I pulled away instinctively, the movement abrupt. I think I'm really tired, I said quickly, my voice trembling. I need to sleep. He nodded, stepping back with a small, almost sad smile. Of course. Good night. As he left the room, I felt a mix of relief and confusion. Something had shifted between us, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The unspoken tension, the lingering touches, it wasn't my imagination, and it left me feeling trapped in a situation I didn't know how to navigate. The unease I felt continued to grow, like a weight pressing on my chest that wouldn't go away. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself that the tension I felt was in my head, but the moments kept piling up. Small, seemingly insignificant actions that collectively screamed that something was wrong. Each time Dad entered the room, the air felt heavier, and I became hyper-aware of every glance, every word, every lingering moment. One evening, I decided to confront my feelings head-on. I couldn't keep living in this fog of confusion and unease. I needed clarity, even if the truth scared me. As we sat down for dinner, I carefully chose my words, my heart pounding in my chest. Dad, I began hesitantly, my eyes fixed on my plate. Do you think Things feel different since Mom's been away. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. What do you mean? He asked, his tone calm but tinged with something I couldn't place. I don't know, I said, trying to sound casual. It just feels weird, like the house is quieter or something. He nodded slowly, setting down his fork. I know what you mean. It's been strange without her here. But it's also been nice, spending time with you. Just the two of us. There it was again, that weight behind his words, the undercurrent that made my skin prickle. I forced a small smile and focused on finishing my meal, desperate to escape the conversation. But his words lingered, filling the silence between us like a heavy fog. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard footsteps outside my door. My heart raced as the soft knock I had come to dread echoed through the room. Yeah? I called out, my voice shaky. The door opened and Dad stepped inside. He didn't bring tea or water this time. He just stood there, his expression soft but intense. I wanted to check on you, he said quietly. You seemed upset earlier. I'm fine, I replied quickly, sitting up in bed. Just tired. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. You don't have to keep saying that, he said, his voice low. You can talk to me. About anything. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The tension in the room was unbearable, and I gripped the blanket tightly, hoping it would ground me. He sat on the edge of the bed, his proximity making my pulse race. I feel like we've grown apart, he said, his tone heavy with emotion. I don't want to lose that connection we used to have. The words felt too intimate, too personal, and I struggled to find a response. We're fine, I said quickly. It's just been busy, that's all. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a chill down my spine. I pulled my hand away instinctively, my breath catching in my throat. I'm sorry, he said softly, his gaze searching mine. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It's okay, I murmured, my voice trembling. I'm just really tired. He nodded, standing slowly. But before he left, he turned back to me, his expression unreadable. Good night, he said quietly, his voice lingering in the air even after he closed the door. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination. I couldn't keep tiptoeing around the tension between us. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure I was ready to hear them. As I walked into the kitchen, I found Dad already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. Morning, he said, his tone light but his eyes heavy with something unspoken. Morning, I replied, grabbing a cup of tea and trying to steady my nerves. The silence stretched as we went through the motions of breakfast, each moment filled with an underlying tension that neither of us addressed. Finally, I broke the silence. Do you think Mom will be back soon? He looked at me, his expression shifting. Probably in a couple of days, he said. Why? Are you missing her? Yeah, I said honestly. It just feels weird without her here. He nodded, his gaze lingering on me. It's been nice, though, he said softly. Having this time together. The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Dad, I began, my voice shaking. Do you think things have been different between us lately? His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought he might deny it. But then he sighed, setting down his cup. I think we've just had more time to talk, he said carefully. It's brought us closer. Closer how? I pressed, my heart pounding. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe it's just... I've been thinking a lot about how much you mean to me. The words felt like a punch to the gut. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I think I'm going to go out for a bit," I said quickly, grabbing my bag. "Wait," he said, standing as well. "I didn't mean to upset you." "I just need some air," I said firmly, cutting him off. "I'll be back later." As I walked out of the house, the tension finally broke, replaced by a whirlwind of emotions: confusion, fear, anger, and sadness. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing for certain. Things between us had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Leaving the house that day was like taking my first breath in what felt like weeks. The tension, the weight of unspoken words, and the creeping unease had become too much to bear. As I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, I replayed the events of the past few days in my mind, searching for clarity. How had things spiraled so far? When had the familiar bond I shared with my dad twisted into something I didn't recognize? I called my best friend, desperate for a sense of normalcy. Hearing her voice was a relief, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her everything. Instead, I danced around the truth, vaguely describing the unease I'd been feeling at home. She listened patiently, offering comfort in the form of jokes and reassurances, but it wasn't enough to quiet the storm in my mind. When I returned home later that evening, the house felt different. It was quieter, darker, and somehow colder, even though the thermostat hadn't changed. Dad was sitting on the couch, watching TV, but the way his head turned when I entered the room made my stomach twist. His expression was soft, almost apologetic, and it filled me with dread. "Hey," he said quietly, muting the TV. "I was worried about you." "I just needed some air," I replied, keeping my distance. He nodded, but the silence that followed was heavy. "I'm sorry if I've been making you uncomfortable," he said after a moment. "That wasn't my intention." I froze, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to accept his apology and move on, but another part knew that we couldn't pretend things were normal anymore. The line had already been crossed. "It's okay," I said finally, though the words felt hollow. "I think we just need some space." His face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I understand," he said. "I don't want to lose the bond we have, but if space is what you need, I'll give it to you." The next few days passed in a haze of avoidance. I stayed in my room as much as possible, keeping interactions with Dad brief and superficial. The atmosphere in the house felt strained, like a rubber band stretched too far, ready to snap at any moment. When Mom finally returned, her presence was like a breath of fresh air. The tension in the house seemed to dissipate instantly, replaced by her familiar warmth and energy. I clung to her, grateful for her grounding presence. But even with her home, the unease lingered beneath the surface, a silent reminder of everything that had happened while she was away. I debated whether to tell her. Every time I opened my mouth to say something, the words caught in my throat. How could I explain what had happened without shattering her world? How could I risk the stability of our family, even if it already felt like it was crumbling? The guilt of my silence weighed on me, but so did the fear of what might happen if I spoke up. Dad, for his part, acted as though nothing had changed. He was attentive to Mom, engaging her in conversation and helping around the house like he always did. To anyone else, he seemed like the perfect husband and father. But I knew better. I saw the way his eyes lingered on me when he thought no one was looking, and it made my skin crawl. I threw myself into distractions, anything to keep my mind off the growing fracture in my family. I took up extra shifts at work, stayed out late with friends, and avoided being alone at home whenever possible. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the memories of those moments with Dad haunted me. They played on a loop in my mind, each one a reminder of the boundary that had been crossed. One evening, as I sat in my car outside the house, I found myself unable to go inside. The thought of facing him, even in the most mundane circumstances, was too much. I pulled out my phone and texted my best friend, asking if I could stay at her place for a few days. She didn't hesitate, telling me to come over immediately. That night, I told her everything. Every detail, every moment that had left me feeling trapped and confused. She listened without judgment, her expression shifting from shock to anger to deep concern. "You need to tell someone," she said firmly. "This isn't okay." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Deep down, I knew she was right. But the thought of confronting the situation, of tearing my family apart, paralyzed me. "I don't know if I can," I admitted, my voice shaking. "What if no one believes me?" She reached out, squeezing my hand. "I believe you," she said, "and I'll be here every step of the way." Her support gave me strength, but the road ahead still felt daunting. The fallout from what had happened wasn't just about me, it was about my entire family. I knew that whatever I decided to do, nothing would ever be the same again. The decision to confront the situation wasn't easy. I spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with the potential fallout, what it would mean for me, for my family, for the delicate structure of our lives. But I couldn't keep living in the shadow of that tension, that unspoken truth. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about reclaiming my peace and setting boundaries that I should have drawn long ago. With the encouragement of my best friend, I decided to tell my mom. One evening, while Dad was out running errands, I sat her down in the living room. My hands trembled, and my voice cracked as I told her everything. Every uncomfortable moment, every lingering glance, every word that carried a weight it shouldn't have. At first, she didn't speak. Her face shifted through a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then heartbreak. "I don't understand," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "How could this happen?" I felt a pang of guilt, wondering if I should have kept silent. But her reaction also reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. She deserved to know, and I deserved to have someone on my side. "I don't know, Mom," I said, my voice barely audible. But I couldn't keep it inside anymore. She hugged me tightly, her tears soaking into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have seen something. I should have done something." Her guilt mirrored my own, but I reassured her that none of this was her fault. We talked late into the night, unraveling the layers of confusion and betrayal. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mom confronted Dad, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. I stayed in my room, unable to bear the confrontation. I could hear their voices rise and fall, words too muffled to understand, but heavy enough to fill the entire house with tension. After their conversation, Dad left. I don't know where he went, and I didn't ask. All I knew was that the house felt lighter without his presence. Mom reassured me that she supported me, that she believed me, and that she would handle things from here. Her strength gave me the courage to begin healing. After their conversation, Dad left. I don't know where he went, and I didn't ask. All I knew was that the house felt lighter without his presence. Mom reassured me that she supported me, that she believed me, and that she would handle things from here. Her strength gave me the courage to begin healing. Therapy became an essential part of my recovery. I needed a space to untangle the complicated emotions that had taken root. Anger, guilt, sadness, and even confusion about the bond I had once shared with my dad. My therapist helped me see that what happened wasn't my fault, that his actions were his responsibility, not mine. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild my sense of self. Mom and I grew closer during that time. Our relationship, once marked by casual closeness, deepened into something more profound. She became my confidant, my rock, and I leaned on her as I navigated the aftermath. Together, we worked to create a new sense of normalcy, even as the scars of what had happened lingered. Over time, I came to terms with the fact that I might never have all the answers. Why Dad had acted the way he did, what he had been thinking. I realized those were questions I didn't need to answer to move forward. What mattered was that I had taken control of my life, set boundaries, and found my voice. Looking back, the experience taught me some painful but valuable lessons. I learned that trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild. But it's also okay to let go of relationships that no longer serve you. I learned the importance of listening to my gut, of recognizing when something feels wrong and having the courage to act on it. Most importantly, I learned that healing isn't linear. There were days when I felt like I had moved past the pain, only to have it resurface unexpectedly. But each time, I reminded myself that progress isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. Today, I feel stronger, more self-assured, and more in tune with my emotions than ever before. The shadows of the past still linger, but they no longer define me. I've taken back control of my story, and I refuse to let it be one of silence and fear. Instead, it's a story of resilience, courage, and growth. If you're facing something similar, know this: you are not alone. You have the right to set boundaries, to seek support, and to demand respect. Your voice matters, and your healing is worth fighting for. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed the way you saw someone you trusted? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you found strength in difficult times. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more gripping stories of resilience and growth. Stay tuned for our next video. You won't believe the twists and turns in the next tale of betrayal.